Thank you. Technology, great. Okay, so on the screen here we have some New Zealand Sign Language signs that basically say, what if all New Zealand children learn sign language? Bit of an outline, so we're going to have an introduction to New Zealand Sign Language, some history, some of the issues. Steve's going to look at some of the myths around sign language. Then we're going to look at learning sign language and who can actually learn sign language. And Liz has got some wonderful little video clips and some experiences that she's going to share with you around her own children. And then we're also going to look at what are the benefits or potential benefits of learning sign language for everybody, for every children, not just deaf children. I'd firstly like to acknowledge Deaf Aotearoa. This week is New Zealand Sign Language Week. Deaf Aotearoa is a fantastic organisation that is predominantly about advocating and increasing awareness of the deaf community, and in particular New Zealand Sign Language. Is anyone here from Deaf Aotearoa today? Great. Wonderful organisation, doing great work. Wonderful online resources that I encourage people to go and look at when they get the opportunity. Okay, New Zealand Sign Language. It is the language of the deaf community in New Zealand. It is a manual visual language, so manual, produced by the hands and facial and body expressions and gestures, and received and perceived through the eyes. The history, it evolves from British Sign Language with some influence from our friends across the Tasman in Australia with Auslan, or the Australian Sign Language, but it is New Zealand Sign Language, so it is their own version of visual language. And it is different from other sign languages. So if Jeremy was signing like this in America, for example, there'd be some differences that people in America would be wanting to try and decipher, some different vocab, different signs, different expressions that aren't familiar or consistent with people in other parts of the world. The data on how many people use sign language is not the most current. This is based on the census in 2006. We don't know what the real numbers are currently. We're hoping the next census that we've just completed will give us some more up-to-date data around that figure. Just a little bit of history. If you go back to Socrates and Plato and those early philosophers and thinkers, they were pretty disparaging and not the most positive people when it came to talking about deaf people. So deaf people have been around forever and ever. Viewed quite negatively around 1000 BC in those years. In 1880 there was a convention in Milan of deaf educators. There was a bit of a setup. The people that went to that convention were very much in the oralist tradition, believing that every deaf person should be taught to speak. One of the most disappointing things out of that convention was an edict that sign language should disappear, that all deaf children should be taught to speak. As a result of that convention, any deaf teachers who were teaching sign language often lost their jobs, particularly in European countries. Fortunately, however, there were people from both Britain and the US in particular who disagreed with some of the things that came out of that convention and continued to advocate for, teach and support sign language and visual language. In 1880 we had a gentleman arrive in New Zealand, Van Ash was his name. I'm going to hand over now to Steve, because Steve is not only is an advisor of deaf children and a passionate deaf person, but he is also a historian. He knows a lot about the history of deaf in New Zealand, particularly in the Canterbury region. Steve.
Okay, so just a little bit of deaf history to pass on to you. So before Van Ash arrived, there was a woman who was teaching in Charteris Bay, and she taught a family of 9 children who were all deaf, and used New Zealand Sign Language to teach them. But she used British Sign Language to teach them. And at the same time, she travelled over to Australia to learn a little bit of Auslan, Australian Sign Language, and brought that over to the children here. So they learnt a little bit of Auslan and also a bit of British Sign Language through that education. And then a job was advertised to find an educator of deaf children, and a woman named Dorcas Mitchell, she applied for the job, and the government said no. We would prefer to have someone teaching using the oralist system, which was a German system at that time. And so Dorcas Mitchell was very upset about this and asked the government whether she would be able to work alongside Van Ash. And so the government asked Van Ash, and Van Ash said no, because he wanted a pure German system. And so in 1880, Sumner School for the Deaf was established, and that meant that sign language use decreased. It became just an underground language, so people would use it to communicate at home and communicate in other different areas. And that was until 1979. And that's when total communication started being used. And it's very interesting, actually, because... Hold on, I'll just gather my thoughts. Okay, so in America, the system meant writing, drawing, signing, speaking, and whatever the child needed, really. They would focus on that. But here in New Zealand and in Australia, they changed it a little bit, and it became signed English plus speech at the same time. And so they went a little bit off what the original purpose of total communication was. And then in 2006, New Zealand Sign Language Act became recognised in legislation in New Zealand. And that's when New Zealand Sign Language became an official language. About bloody time. And do you want to explain 2010? I've forgotten it. Well, anyway, we're talking about today now. This isn't so much history, but... Yeah, so 2012... What's the sign for politician? Oh, politician. Thank you. So a politician, Mojo Mathers, became part of New Zealand government. Do you want to explain 2010? Because I think it changed. There was some sort of apology to the deaf community about the oral edict in Canada. Is that right?
I just realised I forgot to tell you about the emergency procedures in this building. Follow me. We're supposed to head out of the building that way and run for your life to the car park somewhere. Hopefully we're going to be okay. 2010, there was a International Congress for Education of the Deaf in Vancouver in Canada, and basically the outcome of that gathering was the repealing of all those edicts that were made in 1880 in Milan. Basically a reversal of all the negative things around sign language and insistence on oral delivery and those sorts of things. So basically an apology was issued as well to the people that were negatively affected from the Milan conference. Mojo Mathers, everyone familiar with Mojo? She's our first deaf MP. Well, Mojo was quite an oral communicator. She does use sign language, obviously, but predominantly she's quite an oral communicator and learned sign language later on in life, was my understanding. Okay, so just some of the issues in sign language today. We have a newborn hearing screening program in New Zealand, so every newborn baby will be screened at or soon after birth to determine if they have a hearing loss or not, as long as the screen is doing their job properly, because that's been a bit of an issue in the media in the last few months. If they are identified as being deaf, typically, depending on the obviously degree of deafness, will proceed into a cochlear implant program and receive a cochlear implant around 12 months of age, typically. And that has implications. There's a myth out there that having a cochlear implant will suddenly make you a hearing person. That's not necessarily the case. It certainly provides access to oral communication, but you've had a year or so of your life with actually no access to oral or auditory stimuli when your brain is getting ready for visual things and getting visual stimulus. So there's some issues there. When children have cochlear implants, for example, and go swimming, they need to take their technology off and they're deaf. If they have a shower, they need to take their technology off and they're deaf. So how do they communicate when they lose that technology, don't have access to that technology? There's a lot of growing research around how deaf children learn. A lot more understanding of the visual route to learning languages. There's a couple of video clips that we'll show you later that will highlight that. One of the biggest changes in deaf education particularly is that deaf children typically attend their local school. Historically they'd go and learn together in a classroom with other deaf children, but typically now more and more they're in a regular classroom without other deaf children around. So how do we maintain their access to visual language in that environment when they perhaps are the only deaf child in that classroom or in that school? There's some wonderful work in a number of schools around the place, and Yaldhurst is one that comes to mind, where there's a deaf child in the class, but all the children in that classroom and maybe the wider school have been learning sign language so that they can communicate with this student, which I think is fantastic. To teach or not to teach New Zealand Sign Language, and hopefully by the end of today you'll be convinced that maybe we should be spending more time and energy and resources in teaching our young students New Zealand Sign Language. Now it's my great pleasure to reintroduce Steve Hooker to you. Steve's going to talk about some of the myths of sign language.
Just checking the sign the interpreter used for myth. Okay. So I'm going to be discussing myths. There are plenty of myths out there, and about bilingualism and how bilingual children communicate and how they learn. But what I've done is I've just picked 5, because I think 5 will be plenty enough. I mean, we could continue all night talking about the myths that are out there, so I've just picked 5. I think that's plenty, okay? Oh. Okay, so a lot of people say that sign language is a universal language, but it's not. Each country have their own distinct sign language. And so if you went to America, then they have a one-handed finger spelling system. And if you go to Australia, then their sign language is similar to ours. They use a two-handed finger spelling system. There are some areas that have similar sign languages. So for example, New Zealand, England, and Australia. So they're similar, but there are also differences as well. So for example, in Australia, they do use a lot of finger spelling as part of their communication in sign language. There's a lot of finger spelling, and that's because they think that finger spelling helps children to pick up English words. And so for example, if I had quite a large word and I finger spelt that, then the child would have access and exposure to that word and be able to understand finger spelling instantly. Another myth is that sign language is a translation of English. It is not. All sign languages have their own linguistic structure. They have their own morphology, phonology, and all of those other variables. And I'm not going to go into a big linguistic discourse. I don't want to put you to sleep. It's not worth doing that. But there are plenty of signed systems. So for example, signed English. So this is an example. Hello, how are you today? I am well. There's another one. Visual phonics, which is very interesting. I found out about this 2 years ago. Oh, 2 weeks ago. Thank you. I caught him. He said years. I said weeks. So what happened is we were looking at how children pick up phonology. Okay? And just to give you an example, this is not sign language, it's a sign system. So the sound Okay, another one.
Ow. Ow.
It looks weird. I can see people sort of eyeballing each other saying, oh, what's going on up there? But it's teaching children an understanding of what sort of represents sound. And when children have picked up this idea, they can drop this system. They don't have to continue using it. Okay? So it's just a system. And it seems to be working relatively well. Sign language, it's easy to learn. Well, everyone is very different in that. Okay? Children's brains are like a sponge. They just take on everything when they're young. They just absorb information. And research proves that women can learn sign language better than men. So sorry, guys. That's one up for the woman, eh? And if you see people overseas and you see people learning different languages, so for example Chinese, then they will learn one area of Chinese. And so they might learn Mandarin, or they might learn another dialect that's spoken in another area. And so if you go to Europe, that's another example. If you go to Germany, then there's German, French, and all of these other languages. And so there's a lot of languages, so it's not really an issue. But like any language, it does take time to become proficient. So sign language is not only used by deaf people. My wife is hearing, and she uses sign language. And I have heaps of hearing friends, and they can sign to me as well. And so I work in deaf education, and teachers will sign to me. So it's not only specifically for deaf people. Deaf people do use sign language, that is a fact, but it's not only deaf people. 90% of deaf children are born into hearing families. And the families will use sign language, siblings will use sign language, and that's how a child will learn to express themselves in sign language. And if you're interested in learning sign language, then you could become an interpreter like Jeremy. So that's a job that's available for hearing people who are interested in learning sign language. Also teachers could become teachers of the deaf, or rocket scientists. So one thing, when I was a boy, there was one thing that my mother was told, that if you sign, then your child won't learn how to speak. And that is a lie. That's not true. So if you're using sign language, research now says that it supports the development of spoken language. And really, if you have two languages, any two languages, it's great for the brain, great for communication. It doesn't matter whether you're accessing things audibly or using sign language. And this is a real worthwhile read. It's 4 pages. There's pictures, and it discusses how children with cochlear implants, if they have a cochlear implant and they're speaking and signing at the same time, then they will have better success. And those children are bilingual. And so if you are deaf, and if you're just thinking about deafness and reading and writing and sign language and how to actually join those two languages, as long as you're able to sign and hear at the same time, then you're able to, okay? So this is what we call cut research. I can see some expressions coming back, a reaction to that. Well, what it means is if you have a cochlear implant and you can hear, and if you're using sign language, then the listening and the sign language support each other. And so that's what it's saying. And so the sign language comes first, and then the spoken language. And it depends on the child. Either one could advance quicker than the other, and that could alternate as well. Okay, brilliant. Can we have the next slide? Okay, over to Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz, and I can definitely support that last slide that Steve was talking about. I have 2 deaf children and also a lovely husband. The one thing that's different about my family than probably a lot of your families is that I'm the only one that can hear, except for the dog. Me and the dog, we both can hear. And I have some videos to show you of actually my daughter. I have a daughter who is 2.5 and a son, Jaden, who is 11 months old. And also both my parents are deaf as well. So my first language growing up was New Zealand Sign Language. And as Dean said, I trained to be an interpreter. So I'm a sign language interpreter, as you see Jeremy here. That's my job too, but it's probably got a bit of a back foot at the moment. Looking after 2 wee babies is definitely full on. So I think maybe I'll show the videos of Natalia. And this, I think she's about 15 months old. And she's a bit of a star. Maybe while you're getting it up, I should also say that Natalia
Christmas!
excuse the overexcited mother voice. While you're trying to do that, Natalia had a cochlear implant and was switched on at 11 months old. And Jaden, my son, he's just had his operation 2 weeks ago, and he'll be switched on the 23rd of May, next Thursday. So that's pretty exciting. Here you go.
Is that Santa Claus there? What's that? Dancing? No, we're not dancing. What's that? Tree. Good girl. Tree, what's that? Car. Good girl. Is that Santa's red car? You want to have a look at that? Okay. We'll have a look at this one. What's that? Monkey. Good girl. And what about this one? Who's that? Girl. Good girl. What's that? You want to look at that one? Oh, okay. Here we go. We'll look at this one. What's that? A dog. The dog says woof woof. Woof woof. What's that? Fish. Good girl. What's that? Cat. Clever. What about this one? What's that?
Natalia just signed her friend's
Oh,
name,
you're
Jack.
looking at the photo now. That is Jack. Yes, that's Jack. Yeah, it's Jack. Ta. What about this? What's this? Horse. Good girl. Horse. Yeah, we've got a horse over there. A rocking horse. Talia. What's that one? A mouse. Clever. Clever girl. You want to turn over? Oh, did you see a sheep that says ba, ba? There. What's that? Cluck, 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 cluck. Yes, it's a chicken. It's a chicken. Do you know what that one is? What's that? Quack, 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 quack. That's right, it's a duck. It's a duck. Do you want to turn over? Oh, what's that? Wolf. Good girl, it's a wolf. It's a wolf. Oh, what about this one? Maybe it looks different to what you've seen. What's that one? Can you remember? It goes ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. Ribbit, ribbit. What's the sign? What's the sign? Oh, good girl. Very clever. And what's this one here? Remember what's his name? You've forgotten. Is it a bear? A bear. Oh, there's the panda bear. Yes, panda bear.
So it probably speaks for itself, really. Natalia always really was so visual. I think I've had two deaf children, so I don't know what hearing children are like to teach, but every time I held something or looked at a toy, her eyes would go up, and she knew that she would access all her information visually through what we would tell her. So I should then maybe go on to explain about the deaf community's views about cochlear implants, because that was also quite a difficult journey and decision for us to go through. And we at the start, when Natalia was born, we decided that we weren't giving her a cochlear implant because it's actually not something that we believed in. We didn't know a lot about it. So probably for most of the hearing people here must think that's kind of strange. But in our community, we really value sign language, and that's a really important part of our community and who we are. And so we started to go along that journey, and then had someone who is here in the room tonight who came to visit us one night and said that they had taught a deaf child that was in a school, and that on a kit day where all the deaf children got together, that this child was using sign language primarily, and the other children, when they got together on a kit day with the other deaf children, that they could all speak using hearing aids or cochlear implants, and that none of them signed, and that the student kept going back to the teacher, because the teacher was the only one that they could communicate with, and asked the teacher, why can't all these, I'm deaf, I sign, why are they're all deaf, why don't they sign too? And I think that really hit me one night when she was telling me that story, and I talked to my husband. My husband's deaf, I probably forgot to say that in my nervousness. And so we talked about that, and I think we were both just really stunned, and really, it really changed our view of what we thought our future for our children was going to be. I thought that they would grow up in a community of children who would sign with them, and they could go and play sports and just have what my husband and my parents had. But yeah, that came to enlighten me, and we realised that actually that probably wasn't the future for our children, and so we decided to give Natalia a cochlear implant. And since then, actually, it's been quite an amazing journey to see her learning speech. And I think my focus now is on how amazing sign language is in her spoken language development, because she has sort of broken, I think, all the boundaries in her spoken language development. I do have on there, I think we probably didn't put it on, I've just had a list of some of the things that she was doing around her spoken language, at like 6 weeks old, 6 weeks of listening, after switch on, and that she could recognise words, mum and dad. At 9 months of listening, she had 234 words, and I guess if you think of a baby of 9 months old, of listening, so she had done amazingly well, and that was all down to having a language, having that sign language to start with. And also Jaden now, he started signing at about 8 months, and he probably has, I'd say, up to 10 signs now that he's using consistently. So it'll be really interesting to see his journey as well. Maybe I'll show the other video clip now too, so that you can see Natalia's development in her spoken language. I think she was 2 years, 3 months or something. It wasn't that long ago, that video. And she's 2.5 now. She went to SCIP, which is Cochlear Implant Program. I think it was, a couple of weeks ago. And her spoken expressive language was 3 years and 10 months. And so, I just think that's real evidence that sign language is truly amazing for the brain. I think that's all. I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. Yeah. Oh, do you want? Yeah. People want to ask questions now. That's fine. Or at the end. Yeah.
So, a question here, can young children learn New Zealand Sign Language? I think we've just seen some evidence that they can. And when they're provided with that stimulation in the environment, it comes very, very naturally. And earlier, typically, than spoken language. We've got a couple of more examples here that have children in them signing with each other. And in one of the clips, there's some wonderful teaching going on between the older child and the younger child. And I thought it's a really nice way to just show you how children support each other's development of sign language in this case, but spoken language and communication in a wider context.
Okay, so this clip here I find really impressive. So 2 boys on the clip, they're from China, and an American couple adopted them. And so they speak, well, there's one deaf and one hearing member of that couple, and what happened was they were teaching each other so they could learn spoken English and Chinese and American Sign Language. So 3 languages all in that interaction. And what's really interesting about that is you can see how children sign. It's not perfectly clear, but it's okay. It's developing. And so children are developing their ability of sign language. So it's not on this clip, but on another clip it shows them teaching each other. One was signing it wrong, signing the sign rocket. The other boy was doing it like this, and the brother says, no, don't do it like that, it's like this. And the other boy says, oh, okay, is this all right? And he says, yeah, like this, that's better. No, that's wrong. And so the children were teaching each other. Yeah, so this is another good one.
some great video clips here of children learning from each other. So how do children learn sign language? Obviously they need exposure and stimulation. Who do they get that from? Siblings, parents, the deaf community, going to deaf events, deaf clubs, keeping in touch days that deaf education centres run, preschool, school, online. There's some wonderful online resources about learning sign language, and I might show you some of these shortly. Skype, wonderful opportunity for deaf people to keep in touch on the internet when you've got really good broadband connection. Otherwise it can get a little bit frustrating, as I'm sure we all know. Steve, it worked for you, but I don't have the clicker now, so can you do your magic? How can adults learn sign language? I think the first thing you need to do is make a decision to learn sign language. And I was talking to one of the ladies here who's, she's out the back there. She said, I really want to learn sign language, but I got too busy with my studies and so forth. You need to make that commitment. Actually, I'm going to learn this language. It's an official language of this country. I want to learn it. Go to sign language classes. Link with the deaf community. And there's some wonderful, wonderful online resources that I might just quickly click into and show you what they are. I've got to make a little plug here for Victoria University in Wellington. I know you're at Canterbury and all that, but Rachel McKee and her team in Wellington are doing some fantastic work around New Zealand Sign Language. Could somebody let me know a word they'd like to know the sign for? Rainbow. This wasn't a plant. I don't know this person. I've never met her before. Okay, so rainbow's there. So that's a sign for rainbow. Depends on your hadness. Is it right? Let's have a look. So there's the sign, and you can play it in slow motion, but you can also play it in a wider context. So this is just a fascinating resource that Victoria University and Rachel McKee and her team have developed. I can't speak highly enough of it. I support teachers that are deaf in their training here, and we often refer to this. It's not the real deal as far as communication with a live person, but it's helping build vocabulary and signs, and how do you put those signs into context and so forth. Wonderful resource. They do. There is an app for your iDevice, iPhone or iPad, that has the same information and resources on there. So you can add to the vocab sheet. It prints out the copy of that sign.
Apologies. Can we just, because we have some deaf people in the audience as well, if you have a question, are you able to stand up just so a deaf person's able to identify where the question's coming from? Because a hearing person can hear it and think, okay, coming from the back left corner, but a deaf person can't. So if you could stand up, do a bit of a pose, and then ask your question, if that's okay. You don't have to do the pose.
From the App Store for iTunes, or sorry, for the iDevice, but from the Android.
Or Google Play, you get it on that as well now.
Another resource here is TKI, Thumbs Up. which again has got a lot of information there for teachers, particularly who might be teaching sign language in their classroom. A whole lot of units, scaffolding learning of sign language to different levels of complexity. Again, one of the wonderful things about the technology these days is the access to those resources, and some wonderful, wonderful things going on there. And of course YouTube. I think YouTube is one of the greatest teaching tools ever invented, for those of you who are visual learners, obviously. Now, just to prove that adults can learn sign language, we've got a little activity for you. We're going to get you to just introduce yourself using sign language. So, I'll leave this to Jeremy because he's a lot better looking than I am. We want you to sign to a partner or somebody near you, "My name is," and I'm going to show you the finger spelling chart for you to finger spell your first name to that person. So I'm going to just load that for you. Okay, so there's the New Zealand Sign Language finger spelling chart. Hopefully you can make meaning from those pictures there for each letter of your name. Okay, so remember, my name is. Go for it. My name is, or name, yeah. So my name and spell it. Sorry, do you need that again? How are we going? So, my name, and then spell it. I taught my children finger spelling in, I think, half an hour. They picked it up and still remember it, a couple of years later. It's one of those things that, for some reason, visual languages stick pretty well in the brain. Okay, again, this resource is available online. For the sake of time and getting through, we'll continue, but think about introducing yourself in sign language next time you get the opportunity.
Now there's an online taster class for this week because it's New Zealand Sign Language Week, and so you can get to that through this website, and you can win a prize by participating. So if you do this taster class online, then you can go in to be a prize winner.
Somebody just said the class is full. Full. Is that right?
Are you talking about the registration for taster classes? Because there's registrations, but then there's also an online taster class that you can just participate with at any time at your own pace. And just look at sign language clips and go through that class. And it's very basic. And then there's a quiz at the end to test how well you've picked up the signing skills throughout that class. So it's all online.
Yes, by all means, we'll leave a bit of paper somewhere for you to put email address in. I can email you the slides, which have these links on them, so that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Just some of the benefits of bilingualism, and there's actually quite a lot of research out there, mainly around bilingualism in spoken languages. I'll just let you read that for. I'll talk a little bit more about this now. So some of this research suggests that being bilingual, and we're talking oral languages here, so spoken languages, that children are more flexible in their cognitive thinking, particularly their executive functioning, so their ability to allocate their brain resources to things they do in the environment, so paying attention to things, processing, making decisions, problem solving, monitoring the environment, understanding of language and language functions and aspects of language. Perhaps are better at communication. So with all these benefits of spoken language, I wonder what the research might say about being bilingual in a spoken language and a visual language. Is that going to have added benefits as far as learning in the wider classroom and those sorts of things? Obviously more research is needed in this area, but I think it's worth paying some attention to. We know that deaf children of deaf parents learn sign language naturally and very efficiently and very effectively. And as Liz has illustrated with her own children, having that basis of a sign language seems to have really helped the development of those oral language skills. And those milestones that Liz was talking about were just pretty mind-blowing, considering the short period of time that there's been access to that oral or the spoken language. And Liz talked about children with cochlear implants learning sign language and the benefits of those children for having a visual language to base or to communicate with, as well as a spoken language. And we know there's research starting to show now that finger spelling, those finger spelling signs that we just had up there, can support that development of early spelling, early reading and writing and spelling and those sorts of things. There's a lot of research around phonics and phonological awareness and the challenges that some children have in developing those skills to support their early reading and literacy development. And perhaps some of those visual supports may support and accelerate some of those learning aspects. This is a really interesting video clip from a lady in Gallaudet University, which is the deaf university in the States, and she's talking about the bilingual brain from a very neurological aspect, I suppose, and it's quite fascinating. Steve might want to say a couple of words about this.
This is just amazing. Okay? So the research has taken place through the last few years and looking at how children learn bilingually. And the woman is Dr. Petito. And the research is on the brain and how children actually acquire a first so how they acquire languages. So it first looks at a hearing child and then a deaf child in terms of how they acquire language. So is the doctor deaf or hearing? They're hearing, but they are quite amazing. They've done quite extensive research on the topic. And if you have some free time, I would recommend reading this. It is fantastic. I just worship the ground that she walks on. But one other thing that's really interesting about this is that there's research that was done just 2 months ago, and they were looking at people from Sweden, England. So they picked some people from Sweden, and then they chose some hearing people from England, and then they chose deaf people and hearing people from both countries. And I think there were about 18 people. And what they did was they used an MRI, and so they had all of these wires attached to the head like this, and they were looking at the brain activity, how the brain processed information, and what they found was that the visual side, in terms of listening through the eyes and then hearing through the ears, the brain takes it in exactly the same way, in the same area of the brain. And so on this clip she will explain more.
The BL2 laboratory, which is short for the Brain and Language Laboratory, is a very exciting initiative at Gallaudet University. I'm thrilled to be part of this wonderful moment in Gallaudet's history. The laboratory will allow Gallaudet to establish its own neuroimaging center. This is very unusual for any university in the United States. Most universities have neuroimaging centers, but they're part of medical complexes, they're part of hospitals, and a scientific researcher must share the time on the scanner with all the doctors who need to use the scanner for medical reasons. Here, Gallaudet has its own research-dedicated neuroimaging laboratory. Decades we have studied how knowledge comes into the human brain through sound, how concepts are formed through sound, how information is exchanged through sound. VL2 is adding new revolutionary information to the scientific and public world. VL2 is studying how knowledge enters through the eyes, how visual percepts enter through the eyes and get translated into knowledge. We use the existence of sign language and deaf people and deaf culture as an exciting window into this information to widen the perspective of how human beings form knowledge, and through this new lens to show stunning advantages that visual processing can afford to all visual learners and to all people. It's almost as if only one modality received the lion's share of the attention, and now finally this very important modality, namely vision, it's getting its fair share, and showing how processing in that modality affords a young child, a person, surprising attentional, cognitive, and linguistic advantages that we never knew were possible before. We have found that with precision, the identical brain tissue that we thought was special to processing sound also processes human sign languages, and that the course of acquisition in sign language is identical to the acquisition of speech. And this teaches us that the human brain is not exclusively searching for sound. Instead, it's searching for the patterns that are pressed into the hands or onto the tongue. The brain doesn't care what you give it. It will press out its search for patterns and its production of patterns on the hands or the tongue, and will do so equally.
FNIRS uses light to measure where neural activities happen in the brain. Because it only uses light, we're able to take a look at young infant brains.
Revolutionizing the idea of early intervention. Here we can see the development of very specific brain tissue that's important for language, and we can see when something goes wrong. We can see it before the child even begins to produce language. Now, most diagnostic tests for language problems with a young child occur when the child is age 3 or age 5. We can detect children who are at risk for language problems well before they even are those ages, well before they're age 3 or 5, even as early as a few months old. And then we can, and the benefit of that is we can design highly targeted therapies that really address remediation of the specific language aspects that they will need support with. The future is going to bring many research projects and many attempts to translate the research into meaningful application to education and educational policy. At the specific scientific level, my work has led me into brain tissue that we used to think was dedicated to sound, we now know is dedicated to temporal patterning that's true of all world languages, sign language and spoken languages. Not only do we now know that sign languages are real languages because of the linguistic commonality that all languages share. Not only do we know that sign languages are a real language because of the cultural commonality that all languages share, but we now know that sign languages are real languages because they are biologically equivalent. The human brain does not discriminate between the hands and the tongue. People discriminate, but not our biological human brain.
So this is really interesting. So I think the last point she summarized beautifully. I mean, we discriminate, but the brain doesn't. So the brain really just takes on anything, any language. And so that raises some very important issues. Okay, so should we think about teaching both? Should we think about teaching speech and sign language separately, English and then sign language, not hello, my name is, and mixing up the languages, speaking and signing at the same time, having them clearly distinct from each other. So is that something we should think about? So I think it's something really worth mulling over. Okay, so challenges. There are big challenges. So the first one is facts versus beliefs. Okay? So facts are what we know. They're fact. And beliefs are what I believe is the best way. So I believe this way is better than that way, or that way is better than this. But we're not interested in that. What I'm interested in is what you know. And so in my job, when I'm working with babies, children, parents need facts. If I give them my opinions, then I'm not doing a good job. I'm not being effective. In the same way, if you're working with hearing children, then you want them to have facts as well. right? And so I think that's something that we really need to reflect on and think about. I think that's an important thing to mull over. And professional bias. All teachers and professionals, audiologists, speech language therapists, everyone have their own biases. I have biases. I prefer signing. But I don't tell families that. It's not my place. And I don't tell families what to do in terms of the cochlear implant issue. That's not my place either. So audiologists can't say that sign language is wrong, or you need to learn sign language. That's not their place. They can't do that. So again, that's an opinion compared to fact. And attitudes? So you remember way back in the 1800s when there were Chinese people here, and a lot of people would say, oh, Chinese people are taking our food and they're stealing our gold and all of that. You remember that? It was all through the newspapers and the views that we had on Chinese people, and also on European people as well. So it wasn't good, and so it's important that we look at how we see things. And so when we see things differently, we either accept it or reject it. It's the same as learning. Some things you're comfortable with learning, and some things you're not comfortable with learning. If you have facts, then that's okay. You're able to choose which facts you accept and which you don't. Community involvement. That is really, really, really important. So if you have members of the deaf community and hearing community, I think that coming together means that we're able to empower each other and be stronger together and be able to learn from each other as we teach. And if we do that, then I think that we'll be able to break through those barriers and do that together, as opposed to just coming up against a brick wall and thinking, why are there these issues, why is the funding not right, and all that sort of stuff. So we can work together to get through that stuff. I think deaf teachers are really important. So research shows that deaf teachers do have different skills than hearing teachers. So for example, eye gaze. So if I was watching someone, say you're all here, and like I did before, so if you had one person there who just looked at me and they had body language like this, and I was like, okay, well that person is not being so clear. So that's what happened before. I saw their body language, I picked up that something that I'd said wasn't clear for them, and then I went back and clarified for them. And so that's something that deaf people are able to do. They're able to spot body language and those subtleties. And also deaf people know what it's like to be educated. And quite often in a class discussion, a deaf person will be overlooked and they'll miss out. So people from the rest of the classroom will have interaction and the deaf person will be missed. But a deaf teacher would expect an answer from the deaf student. And it's important to get interaction and feedback from a deaf student to ensure that they are understanding. And the next point is code switching. So that's really interesting. So it's like if you have a child, and the child may not be able to communicate so clearly. And so a deaf person is able to adapt their signing style to match the signing style of the deaf student. And so that's code switching. And if you have a deaf person who's not clear at signing, I'm able to adapt my signing so that I'm able to understand them and they're able to understand me. So it's just something that we do naturally, to support each other as code switch so that we're able to communicate.
We'll give Jeremy's voice a rest and give his hands a workout. So the future. So we need to find out what are the added advantages of bilingualism related to visual and spoken languages, and what are the advantages for children who are hearing. I suspect there are many out there, and we need to document those, and we need to highlight those educational benefits, the cognitive benefits for children. What about hearing loss later in life? If you get a grounding in a visual language early on, and you lose your hearing later in life, is there benefits and advantages there perhaps? Are there economic benefits of becoming a bilingual, multilingual society? If you look at examples in Europe, for example, Switzerland and Sweden and so forth, there are potentially correlations between the multilingual nature of those countries and economic advantages, perhaps. Also, the influence and role of technology is another area that I think requires a lot further exploration and influence on developing these skills and also maintaining and bringing communities closer together. So in summary, New Zealand Sign Language is an official language of this country. Deaf children are now attending their regular schools, often on their own without other deaf peers. We know that children have an amazing ability to learn multiple languages. We've seen good examples of that tonight. Can we perhaps get a head around that maybe all children in schools could learn multiple languages, including New Zealand Sign Language? And let's throw Te Reo Māori in there as well perhaps. And so we've got 3 official languages. Perhaps we could have a goal of ensuring all our citizens were fluent in the 3 languages of our country. The technology is fantastic. It's breaking down barriers and creating new opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for sign language, and I don't believe it does. So what are we waiting for? I'd like to think that if all New Zealand children did learn sign language, we might have a country that's more inclusive, both socially, children are socially and cognitively competent, and we have a very prosperous society. On that note, I'd like to say thank you for coming out tonight. Thanks for journeying here. I hope you've enjoyed some of the things you've heard and seen tonight. I'd specifically like to thank Liz and Steve for their massive contribution and input tonight. I've very much appreciated it. It's been a pleasure developing and working with you on this.